for them to come, but um
Let's do it.
I put it on YouTube and Facebook just so that in case anybody needs to join from there, because I know Stacy joined. Were you on YouTube last time? Stacy?
No, I went through Streamyard.
Oh, okay. It was still on Streamyard. You could
Yes,
just do
I went through
comments.
Streamyard
Okay.
last time.
Okay. Because Alicia. Oh no! Now we lost her. She fell off again.
Oh my gosh.
She does not have any luck. Device is not connected. All right, let's see if she'll hop back on.
Yeah, I've never even heard of StreamYard. I learned something new tonight.
So StreamYard is just for it's a place that essentially it's like Zoom, but it's more for presentations, so it pushes it to YouTube and Facebook. And I just did that again so that we can have these recorded for anybody who might want to watch them.
Cool.
But I don't now we're just waiting for our guests to join and see if there's anybody else. We'll wait a few more minutes and then we can just start chatting about the book anyway. Did you do audio or did you do...
I did audio.
Reading?
I am so terrible. I love actual books. That is my favorite. But with the kids, it's just like impossible. So I find that I get so much more accomplished. I can actually finish a book. Because I can listen to it when I'm doing stuff.
I totally understand.
Yeah. So like, and half the time I still end up picking up a hard copy later because I just like the tangibleness of it. But
hi. We're still waiting for everybody to join us.
I want to hear you better. Let me
okay, take your time
here. There we go. It's a little better. I'll put some lipstick so I can look a little bit more presentable. I just got out of the operating.
You're fine. Wow.
Yeah, I had 2 cases this morning.
Oh, there we go.
TJ's
getting everybody hopping on. Yep, here he is. Everybody's hopping on.
How you doing? I'm
hello.
Just like, hi. I'm on my way to meet Judy at her office. I'm like 5 minutes away, but I thought I would hop on now so that we could all say hello.
That's cool. No problem. She's already got your title on her, your name is already on her screen waiting for you.
Excellent.
So I am Liz. I've been messaging you, and Jackie is turning her camera around. Jackie's the first one who tweeted at you guys.
That was awesome.
I was like, oh my gosh, there was a response. It's funny because I thought about reaching out. That's how we get a lot of our authors, is just casually reaching out and saying like, hey, we're reading your book, just so you know. And it's so funny too. I liked your email this morning. TJ emailed this morning and said, like, I don't know which book you're reading. If you're reading First Cut or Aftershock, I'm like, oh, we're back in 2014. Sorry, we read Working Stiff.
Yeah, we don't even care. You read any of our books.
Yeah, we're just so glad that people read our books. It just makes us so happy.
Well, so I'll tell you a little bit about it. We started as a true crime fan club. Basically, that sounds terrible. I hate to say that, but for my favorite murder. So we were fans of that podcast, and I don't know how many of us even still listen to that anymore. So I switched over, and now we're My Favorite Crime, because generally we go a lot broader now. So we talk about everything and anything kind of crime adjacent even, and we do read nonfiction sometimes, so I think next year I'll have to put First Cut or Aftershock on the list.
They're fiction, so we do. Yeah, I should tell you that they're based on actual cases. So.
That's exciting. I try to mix it up. I personally am usually a fiction reader, so it's difficult for me to get into nonfiction usually. But your writing style is absolutely amazing. I just loved it. It was a friend hanging out with me in the car because I do audio. I liked your narrator. I think Stacy fell off. She was on here earlier. She did not like the narrator as much.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it because again, it was just like a friend, and it really sounded like your voice. I just heard it. So
yeah, let's get Stacy back on because I'd love to hear why. We always want to hear.
Interested.
This is something that readers may not realize about most authors. We want to hear what you don't like about our books, because we know there are things that we don't like about our books. And we actually want to hear where they intersect with you. But I think part of the reason that you might have really liked the narrator is because it's a first-person narrator. It's a memoir, which is different from other nonfiction books.
Yeah. Stacy is hopping on. Let's see if I can add her to the stream. She has some connection issues sometimes. But the other thing I'll say, two things I will add, and then I will let everybody else talk too. When you talked about there was the part where you talked about having the cherub sculpture and using that as a paperweight. I was like, oh yes, she's my person. And then of course you made a joke later about bringing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich home from the tent, and TJ was like, oh, I was like, yes, that's exactly. I would have thought the same thing. I would have been like, yeah, I'll bring my kid home a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Well,
I would not have.
Yeah, life goes on. That's what Danny's role was.
Yeah, I would not have second guessed that at all. So
yeah, well, especially if you have a 2-year-old hanging around, that they have immediate needs and some things that they really latch onto, right. And if you can give that to them, great. So yeah, that was what Danny did. Was he really kept the same? He really did.
And at that age group, anything you bring them that's special,
yes,
they're over the moon for.
Yeah.
So I remember. Yeah,
he didn't care that came from my office.
Right. So we have with us Stephanie and Jackie, who I introduced a little bit earlier, and then Stacy is, I don't know, Stacy, are you here?
We see your name.
I see your name, but I can't hear you.
I'm going to drop off, and then I'll be joining Dr. Melinek in a moment.
Perfect. Okay, so I will, I guess he'll just come on your camera anyway. So, Jackie, do you have anything you want to say before I keep rambling?
Yeah, so one cool thing. So I actually read it about a year ago. I didn't realize a whole year had gone by since I read it. So we donated my dad's brain to science. He died early in COVID, unrelated to COVID, due to his neurological condition. And hearing the experience of retrieving a brain really brought it home for me, what it's like, because it was just such a process. And on top of that, with COVID, so they had to test his cadaver for COVID, and then pluck his brain out, and then we didn't.
What did he have? Do you mind if I ask? What was the neurological illness?
Sure, it was multiple system atrophy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and he was very atypical in his presentation. His brain got donated to this brain support network, and it's at Mayo Jacksonville, I think.
I got to thank you for that, because a lot of people don't realize how incredibly important it is that people donate their organs, not just to either as to save other people's lives, because that's huge, is when an organ can be reused as organ and tissue donation for those who have organs that are failing, like to donate a kidney if you're brain dead. But even in cases where you can't donate to living people, donating your body to science, whether it's to a medical school to be able to dissect them, or what you did for a research bank, can be so important, because we scientists, we rely on those donations to be able to make advances. Here he is.
There he is.
We really rely on those donations. They're so important. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, so he was very difficult to diagnose. He was sick for about sick for 4 years, and his first trip to NIH, they said, you're probably going to get a diagnosis in your lifetime, but you could do this. And he came home and wouldn't stop talking about it, even though he wasn't exactly fully symptomatic of MSA really until the last year of his life. But I guess as a pathologist, you'll appreciate how my mom called. She's like, all right, he passed. I'd been there all day. I look at my husband. I'm like, all right, we got to go take care of this. I call the brain donation people, and they're like, well, buy the ice to take care of his head. So I'm like, okay. So I haul over to ShopRite, and anyway, it's COVID. We're all wearing masks. And they're like, oh, who's having a party? And I'm like, oh, just something at my mom.
Oh my God, Jackie.
I don't know.
There's a moment my brain just shut down. But because he never wanted anything like any services or anything. So we were lucky to see him the next day, and we walked in, and there must have been something that we didn't see that the funeral director did. He hustled over there real quick to fix something under his head, and then it was like, okay, have your last moment, have fun,
Yeah, I mean, deaths during COVID has just been out. I mean, it's this freaking pandemic. It's just messed with everything, our ability to grieve, our ability to move on, our ability to just function every day, you know. But on the plus side, we could do stuff like this. I mean, I've got to say the Zoom culture that has kind of come up of it, the working from home, there have been some pluses.
Yep. Yeah, it's but yeah, reading about what you saw with the Green coming out, that was like, that really hit close to home. And I looked back at my Goodreads notes, and that was one of the few things I really marked down.
Thanks you for letting me know about that.
You're welcome.
So how do you guys know each other?
So go ahead.
My husband's a huge book nerd, probably more than I am, and he was a frequent stopper at Capriccios and there's up here.
Yeah, so I had a bookstore, brick and mortar, and in Harford County, Maryland, and we so like I said, we all started listening to the podcast My Favorite Murder, and I don't know how many of us listen to that anymore, but we started our podcast actually before the store was a brick and mortar, before it was a physical store.
Wow.
We were doing a podcast, or we were doing a book club, and we started meeting in a brewery, a local brewery, because what's better than beer and books, right? So especially when you're talking about something like this. So we've been meeting for 3 years. This is just kicking off year number 4, actually. We're starting year number 4 now. Wow. Last month we had Robert Kolker, Hidden Valley Road and The Lost Girls. I don't know if you know those 2 books, but so we, every once in a while, we're able to get the authors, and it's always fun to connect with them, and just hear their side of things, and be able, like you said in your email, to be able to talk to people who have written the book while we've read it. So it's like the Insiders Book Club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the and like you said, Stacey's trying to get on again. She only said she didn't like the narrator's voice. That's all she put in the comments.
Oh, her voice, yeah.
It's the voice. But again, like I said, I liked it personally.
Yeah, she got an Earphones Award, which really surprised us because.
Oh, the narrator. You mean the narrator? Oh,
the narrator. The narrator. Oh, no. I'm sorry. No, specifically the narrator. No.
Yeah, we've heard that. I like her narration, but lots of people didn't like her voice. She was really terrible at trying to capture my native Boston accent, which I slip into every once in a while. And she also mispronounced a bunch of names. Yeah, which was
oh.
Like, my dad is Menachem, like Menachem Begin. So she called it Menachem. And I was like, where did you get that from?
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's definitely like it's funny because the name, my bookstore name, Capricos, I say it Capricos because that's how I read it in a book. Like it's an island in a book, and that's how I heard it in my head. So a lot of people are like Capriccios, and I'm like, I don't hear it that way. So I'm like, I don't care as long as you know there's a bookstore and you know where to buy books.
So how long has your brick and mortar been open, and how's it doing?
So that's a great question. So I was going to say, so during COVID, I adapted, and we were just started delivering books. So we were doing deliveries, and I was just, leaving stuff on doorsteps. And then I was like, why am I paying rent? Why do I have a brick and mortar? So we actually closed the brick and mortar, and I do almost all online now. But I did just buy a trolley.
Oh.
A van trolley that I can drive around. Oh, Stephanie, I don't think did you not see this announcement? I was just on your face. Yeah, so we just bought a trolley, and it's still in the and we're driving it around. We did move to the eastern shore of Maryland, but I still do a lot in Harford County. I'm going to Harford County tomorrow, actually.
I will have to bring the kids to see it.
Yes.
Great.
It needs some work.
And you gotta tag us if you do photos on Twitter and stuff. We'll help spread the word because I got like 50,000 followers. I might as well use it to spread the word about you.
No, that's an especially brilliant idea because essentially with the trolley, what you have is the front of the store, right, where all the hot books are.
Exactly.
And you get
the
people in there, but if they have something else they specifically want from you, then you can order it from.
And that's really what they were doing. My store was only 1,000 square foot anyway, so I could never carry everything everyone wanted all the time. So it's just, and the idea too is that the hope was that people were going to get vaccinated and that we would be gathering again, and that after a year of not gathering, that we would be able to, we would want to get together again. And the idea is that I would be at markets, like I do farmers markets and events like that. But obviously that's going to I'm kind of glad now that the trolley's taking a little bit longer to get fixed, because now I don't feel as bad because we're kind of going backwards, unfortunately. But
I know. Yeah. Well, it's a lack of people wanting to get vaccinated. And I mean, I genuinely, so you guys know we're in New Zealand because of COVID.
Yeah.
I don't know if you followed us on social media or any of that stuff, but basically what happened with us was I was working at the Alameda County Sheriff Coroner's office, and they just weren't taking COVID seriously. I had gone to them and I said, okay, we've got 4 forensic pathologists, 2 of them are in their 80s. We've got a problem if we get COVID, and we need to do separate shifts so we don't overlap. We need to create bubbles like at work. We can't be having meetings with 20 people anymore. Like if we're doing social distancing at home and masking, we have to do it at work as well because this is an enclosed space. We don't have good ventilation. It's not like we can open any windows in here. It's like one of these old offices. And they're like, why? And I said,
Why?
it's aerosol driven. It's spread by aerosols. They're like, no, it's not. And I'm like, yes, it is. And here are the articles, and here's the stuff from the WHO, and here's material from Wuhan that I got online from other researchers. And I just was very, very frustrated that they weren't taking it seriously. So anyway.
We're very lucky to be here in New Zealand.
Yeah, so I got
we
offered
can't
a
go.
position.
We can't even come visit the United States
And
because
that's
of
the
our
downside.
visa. We have a 1-year work visa that is getting re-upped year to year,
Yeah.
and that does not allow us to leave the country without applying for another visa, which we won't get.
Yeah.
So we're
Oh my
safe, but also trapped here.
Yeah, so we can't leave.
Yeah.
And we've
I don't know.
applied for permanent residency, not with the intention of necessarily staying here permanently, though we might. I mean, we're keeping that option open, but primarily because once you get permanent residency, then you can fly in and out. Then you
Right.
can come back.
But like a lot of
Yeah.
people, we don't make plans anymore.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing that COVID did for us.
Yeah.
We don't make plans.
And just so
Right.
you know, so if you guys read Working Stiff, so you know that Daniel, the little toddler in the book, he is now 21 years old.
Oh my
He
god.
is in
God.
college. He's at University of California in Santa Barbara. He's got his own Twitter feed. It's Music Nerd Danny if you're on Twitter. So he's an adult now. And
And so is Leia.
And
so
Leia,
the baby who's born at the very end of the
That's
book, our happy ending baby, she just turned 18, and she's
Oh my
here with us. And we
gosh.
also have a third child named Dina, who's
Dina.
16 here with us.
so if you look at the dedication and Working Stiff, the very last part of the acknowledgments, you'll see the last sentence in it is last but never ever least. Thank you, Dina.
Oh.
And Dina did not exist at the time of the events of Working Stiff, but she definitely did exist when we wrote the book.
Right.
And she was kind of resentful of the fact that I'm not in the book. Why am I not in the book? So we put that in there, and then we showed it to her. And this is when she was like 6 or 7.
We thought this
Came
would
out.
placate her,
Yeah,
and
we know.
and she'd feel special. Look,
Yeah.
it's your name.
Look, your name's in the book, and she goes, nobody ever reads that.
Aw.
Yeah, nobody reads the acknowledgement. Oh, God.
6 is fun.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. So we have 16,
So
which
that,
is also fun.
that can bring us to let me tell you how the process of how the book got written. The reason that it took so long was because Judy was told when she was in medical school by one of her professors, you should keep a diary so you can keep track of how your thinking changes,
school.
right,
Yeah.
as you become a doctor. But nobody in medical school has the time to
Right.
keep a diary.
Yeah.
Luckily, after she had already trained through medical school and pathology residency, when we moved to New York and she started this job at the New York OCME,
Right.
she had an hour-long commute on the bus every day, there and back, right,
Wow.
from the Bronx, like you read about, down to Midtown Manhattan. So she wrote down every day what she did, right?
Right. I took notes. I had a handheld, like pre-iPhone, these handheld electronic devices are called a Hewlett Packard 200LX, and with just 2 thumbs, I'd like thumb in what
Oh,
I
wow.
did that day. And when you've got an hour commute, it kills time, right? And at the end of the day, I would go home and I'd download it onto the computer. And then after 2 years at the New York City office, so my first year was forensics fellowship and the second year was neuropathology fellowship. I was on maternity leave with Leia, and while I was on maternity leave with Leia, that's when I, in my downtime, restructured it because it used to be in chronological order. It used to be
So Judy
today
did
I
all
did
the,
this, today I did that.
this is the really hard structural work that Judy did, apart from recording the actual events. But also, if you think about it, you now learned how autopsy investigation works. On the first day, she might get a dead body and she doesn't even know the name, right? And she does the autopsy, then she finds out the name later that afternoon. Then she finds out who the next of kin is the next day, and she talks to them. And she might talk to the police the day after that. And if it's got some sort of crime involved, it might go to court a year after that. So each of those elements was on a different diary day.
In a different page.
But Judy took them and grouped them together into cases, into individual deaths and how they were investigated. And then she essentially handed it off to me and said, okay, you're a writer. Now let's write a book. Here's the title is Working Stiff. She had the title.
The title was the first thing.
Yeah. We had Daniel, I had decided to be a stay-at-home dad. We had both decided together that I would quit my job and be a stay-at-home dad. So I was there with Daniel. So as a naive new parent, I thought, well, I'll just park the baby in the corner all day and I can just write. It'll be great. What was it, 5 or 6 years later when our 3 kids were all in first grade, I was finally able to do that. But it also took a long time for us to actually write the book because every time I opened the 9/11 material, I couldn't handle it.
It was
I
hard
could not write about it.
for both of us.
A couple of things changed. One was September 11th of 2011, when it was the 10-year anniversary, coming up on the 20-year anniversary. It was the 10-year anniversary of the event. And all of a sudden, this event, which was personal history to us and what we lived through, especially Judy lived through doing it, it became history that I thought we really should be getting this on paper. And also it was because Daniel was starting to get into middle school and he was learning about 9/11 in history class, right? And I realized that there are people alive today who have no memory of this event. And it's a major important event. It's like the Kennedy assassination was for my parents' generation, or like Pearl Harbor was for the generation before that. And we felt like we really needed to write it.
We need to write it down because I'm the only one who knew it from the perspective of the forensic pathologist.
Yeah.
There have been quite a bit of books who were written from the perspective of the family members, the survivors, some of the people who worked on the pile, like first responders, but nobody from the medical examiner had written about that experience, as far as I knew at that time. There have subsequently been a few. I think there was a book that was written by one of the DNA experts and another one by an investigator, but it primarily focused on 9/11. And I at the time that I started thinking about the idea or the concept of Working Stiff, the diary idea, I didn't want to write about a 9/11 book. Like 9/11 didn't even exist yet.
And the publisher didn't want one. The publisher absolutely did not want a 9/11 book, and we didn't want to write one. So we were on the same page.
So that was the thing.
Which is why you'll notice that the chapter about 9/11 is called DM01, right? So it doesn't, if you don't know that from knowing anything about Judy, if you don't know 9/11 is in the book, it's surprising.
Yeah, it does surprise some people. But part of it is because I really wanted to focus on the fact that, there were all these television shows, CSI Miami, Law and Order, The Wire. I mean, there are lots of TV shows portray forensics or forensic investigation. They do it mostly badly, and Crossing Jordan was popular at the time. Hi, Stacey's kid.
Hey, Stacey's kid. How old are you?
Oh, she got headphones on because it's.
Oh yeah.
Hi there.
Hi. How old are you?
Oh, she's got to unmute. There you go.
Yeah.
Hey. Hi. How are you?
I'm 6 years old and I look like I'm 5.
You're 5?
You're 5. Okay. What's your name? If you don't
I'm 6 years old.
Oh, you're 6.
Oh, you're 6 years old. I'm sorry.
And what's your name?
Annalise.
Annalise. That's a nice name. I bet people say that all the time, don't they? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us.
Nice to meet you.
I'm doing the floss.
She's going to floss.
You're going to floss. Okay.
Good.
That's
Good.
very important.
No,
Right.
floss is very important. Oh, sorry. We're very easily distracted by children.
We are.
I love it. Actually, Stacy put that her favorite quote, her favorite TJ quote was "Babies are portable," so that works for not making plans.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, if your spouse has a job that can also move around with you, or if your spouse is a stay-at-home, then it does make things easier. A lot of our, like Judy's medical school friends, where they're 2 doctor families, have a really hard time finding a place to sort of fit in.
Yeah, that's during COVID. My husband already worked from home. He works for a company based out of New York. So that's one reason we were able to move. And we just started homeschooling because why not? Like, that was the time. Yeah. Not even just virtual schooling. I was just like, all right. And we're like the unschooling parents. We're like, if you learn something today, great. But actually, my 9-year-old is just very interested in all this as well. So I'm probably going to wait a little bit longer to let her listen to this book.
Yeah.
But then I think they will love this book. There's nothing in there that's not child friendly, I don't think. Well, except for the one chapter about piercings. The one part about piercings.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't have to know about that right away.
And they might not even figure out really what's going on. Kids understand.
That's true.
It depends on how you feel about salty language too,
Yeah.
because of course.
Oh, no, but-
yeah.
We live
Like-
on a golf course now. Like there's a golf course in my backyard. They have learned more swear words than I realized existed. So
Yeah, I've been really surprised at how many middle school age kids read
Love
this book,
this
and it really
book.
speaks to them, because I thought that this was an
Yeah.
adult book when I read. Like I thought, like when my friends started asking me, "Can my teenager read this book?" I said, "Well, you read it first, and you vet
Yeah, you
it."
decide.
I
Yeah,
didn't
we
give
were-
them
we
enough
were a little-
credit, you know.
And so we've actually spoken at middle schools where we've had students come up to us and go, oh, "I read your book. I love your book." Like, you know, in, when was it, 7th grade or something? So just depending on their own interest, I think kids are really fascinated by things that are taboo, and death.
Yeah, that's
Death is taboo.
Yeah. I think in a
It's
sense they're
something
less
that they don't
afraid of death
understand.
than we
Yeah,
are
they
too,
are in some ways.
because it's
Yeah.
much more remote to them, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't seem as real.
Yeah.
You know, but they tend to be a lot more fascinated with like the logistics of like, where does the body go?
Mhm.
Or what happens next? You know.
Which is
I-
fascinating to me too. Before starting this book, I actually had to sit my wife down and ask her,
That's
"What is
interesting.
an autopsy? Like, what do you do? Like who's in the room with you? What do you wear? What's the
Because
first
I didn't
thing
have
that you
anything
do?"
about that.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
And she had never like come home and said, "Okay, so here's how you perform an
Yeah.
autopsy."
And you-
I didn't know.
But you did see one autopsy. So
Oh,
when,
got
when,
one.
when I was in residency, when I was in my training, there was one day that we were going to go get a bicycle, and we were going to go out to buy a bicycle, but things were running late and everything was delayed, and I still hadn't started the autopsy when he came to meet me at the hospital. And so I said, "Listen."
This was before the days of working stiff. This was
Right.
at
This is
UCLA.
at
Medical Center,
UCLA
when
when I
she
was
was
still training.
training as a pathologist.
So I said to him, "Listen, if you come in and take notes for me, it'll go a lot faster. You won't even have to look. You just write things on the board. I'll yell things out. You write it down. If you don't know how to spell it, I'll tell you how to spell it."
Wow.
And he's like, "Really? I don't have to see anything?" I'm like, "No, you don't have to see anything. You just write things on the board for me.
And
It'll
I
go
figured,
faster."
okay, I'm a writer. I'm
can
supposed to
write.
experience life
Right.
firsthand, so that
There
I
it
can
is.
communicate it. So
Yeah.
I'll go do this,
Wow.
and that's the last
Yeah.
autopsy
Yeah,
I'm
it was
ever
all
going to
right.
be part of,
So he
unless
was-
God
he was-
forbid I need one myself.
He was writing stuff on the board, and then my attending, who is the primary physician who's responsible, like I'm still in training, he comes in and he sees, "Who's this?" Who's like, "This is my husband. He's just taking notes. He's just going to make
He's a
some
helper.
things move faster." Yeah, he's not a doctor, and he was just here to take notes. I hope that's okay. And then my attending was like, "Oh, that's wonderful. Here, come over here, TJ," and like brings him over and says, "Would you like to touch the duodenum? Yeah, this
There
is
it is,
the
sweet.
duodenum."
You feel that? I'm like, no, I don't. I was too much of a coward to tell the guy I was a coward. So
And I was like, "Really, Dr. Brown, it's okay. He doesn't have to touch the duodenum." He's like, "No, put on the glove."
oh, jeez.
but you can say
Wasn't great. I don't know how they do it every day, but
Yeah.
the way they do it every day is that Dr. Melinek is a medical doctor, and all medical doctors have, like I think we wrote in Working Stiff, you've been trained to desensitize, depersonalize your patient. You have to. You know, one of my best friends is a
Yeah.
surgeon. I wouldn't want him operating
Yeah.
on me, obviously.
And he wouldn't want to operate on you anyway.
Right.
And you can't, obviously, I wouldn't do an autopsy to somebody I know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's different. You have to have certain boundaries, and that's one of those boundaries. You don't post your friends, we say.
Yeah. So do you all have specific questions about the book? or
Yeah.
not?
Do you have any questions for us? That's what we're here for. Answer questions.
exactly. I'll let anybody else go first. Stacy, did you want to talk about what you had mentioned? You just said you didn't like the narrator, and I figured I'd let you talk for yourself on that one.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't really say anything specific as to why, but it was definitely, it took me a minute to, I don't know. I can't say, but I was like, it was an interesting enough book that I wanted to listen to it all the time. But it took about a good chapter to, I think, really what it was the way the narrator did TJ's voice and the other men voices. It was just very clearly a female trying to sound male, where I think I would have appreciated it better if she had just like read it.
Yeah.
It's not like it's Game of Thrones where there's like 19,000 people in it,
no,
we need to know differences.
It's also difficult. Yeah. We've heard that from other people about this narration. Our novels are narrated by a different person because they're published by a different company, and each of the publishers, they have their own sort of stable of audiobook talent that they use. And I think that Amanda Dolan, who is the narrator for our novels First Cut and Aftershock, does a much better job with that, especially with male voices, but
And accents too.
accents, because these two books are set in our city of San Francisco. San Francisco is a very diverse place, and there are a lot of characters where English is their second language, or like the narrator Jessie and her brother Tommy are both like me, natives of Lynn, Massachusetts, and when they talk to each other, they slip into their Boston accent, and she has to be able to do that too. And she does a really good job of that. That along with all the medical terms. Yeah. It's a challenge. I don't know how people can do this, do an audiobook. Like, it's a lot of work. They're not well paid, and it comes out so smooth to me. It's one of those things that just amazes me that they can do it at all.
Yeah, we knew that we would not be able to. I mean, I know that there are a lot of authors who do their own reading, but the challenge for us in even though we could have potentially done the reading for Working Stiff and done our own dialogue, the challenge for me would just, I'm working full time as a forensic pathologist. I don't have time for that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then specifically for the novels has a protagonist who slips into her it's a woman's voice, but she has a Boston accent, which I can't do. And she slips into Polish, which I can't do.
The story with Jessie Teska, our protagonist in the novels, is that her mother is from Poland and her father is not, and he doesn't speak Polish. And they grew up in a broken home, in a violent domestic violence situation. And so the mom, as a secret language, would use Polish with her kids. So she and her brother Tommy still speak to each other in Polish every once in a while. She swears.
Mostly
she swears in Polish. Or she has little expressions in Polish. And it's a really hard language also to be able
but
to
it's
do.
the one common language that we both our ancestors speak.
So
I
each
grew
of
up
us
hearing it.
each of us had grandparents who spoke Polish.
Yeah.
So that's like something that we share.
So we know about
So you
it
definitely at
from the
least
third
knew
generation.
the swear words too.
Yes.
Some of them yes,
That's
for
over
sure.
the years.
Yeah. And it was important to us in creating a new
Character.
character for the novels, that her immigrant experience be very shallow, because I have shallow immigrant roots. My grandparents were from other countries, and Judy herself is an immigrant to the United States. She came to the United States when she was 5. So I couldn't imagine writing a character where the immigrant experience was not central to who she sees herself as. So that's how we came up with, a Polish mother as a good sort of.
And it fit in with also some of the themes that we explore, especially in Aftershock. We have themes of immigration and the different types of immigrants that come to this country to work. This being United States to work.
And the reason that we turned to novels is because after we wrote Working Stiff, from having read Working Stiff that it has an arc. A story has to have an arc. And it was largely with the help of the editors that we were able to figure out that the arc of Working Stiff is very simple. Judy, Dr. Melinek, doesn't know anything about death or dying or the changes that happen after death when she gets out as a fully trained doctor in the United States. And you learn all that on the job. So as she's learning it, you, the reader, are also learning it, and that's the arc. Now we wouldn't be able to reproduce that in another book, so we weren't going to write, Working Stiff 2: The Revenge.
Right.
So instead, we wanted to switch to fiction and use her actual experience.
And there is a full genre of forensic pathologists who write memoirs where it's just basically a kind of parade of cases. What I did on this case, or nobody else could figure this out and I figured it out. And that was less interesting to me. It wasn't about self-aggrandizement and making it seem like nobody else could figure it out, but I did. To me, that part of the genre kind of what it does is it doesn't give credit to the team that we work with.
Exactly.
And that's something that, Dr. Hirsch really emphasized. And I got to say, I'm very grateful to him for that, is that he really made me realize over the years that it's not an individual who solves the crime or figures it out. It's usually a team effort. It's the combination of the pathologist, the technician, the family members, the police officers. I know that sounds less sexy for television. On television, they like to make it seem like there's, this one genius Sherlock Holmes style, but that's not the reality. The reality of all crime scene or death scene investigation is usually it's a collaborative effort, and it's multiple people coming together that break a case or that figure out what happened.
So it's not like on Law and Order where it's like, boom, 60 minutes, everyone's solved, wrap this up nice and neat.
All right.
No, it's and as you saw from Working Stiff, one of the things that TJ has frustrations with me is I'll come home from work and I'll say, oh, I did this really interesting stabbing case. And I'm like, where did it happen? I was like, I don't know. I don't pay attention to the location. And then he's like, well, what happened? Did they catch the guy who did it? I'm like, I don't know. Like I don't go
lurking around the DA's office asking about other old cases. I have new cases. So do they.
So every day I get new cases, and then I got to work on those, and I'm not worried about the old ones. The old ones, when I get back the laboratory results, like I get the toxicology back, then I'll close the case. But even then, I don't know if they've caught anybody. Sometimes I don't find out for years.
And even when they do, more times than not, even with a really awful murder, it'll end up in a plea deal. It doesn't go to court.
It's very rare that my cases go to court.
Yeah.
So for my autopsy work, I would say I go to court, on average back in the United States, I go to court maybe once every 2 to 3 months. And now I also have a medical legal practice where I get consulted by attorneys. So for those, I go to court maybe once a month. But those include civil litigation, so lawsuits for wrongful death, things like that, not necessarily criminal.
It's just talking about working as a team and everything. It's funny. I think some of the most interesting people that we've talked to work in medical examiner's office. We talked to our very first virtual event was with Bruce Goldfarb of the Baltimore Medical, and he mentioned he was reading your book, and that's why I think that's what put it on our list. He was one of the first ones to put it on our list. So he was our first, and he's just such a fun. I'm friends with him on Facebook, so he just showed his and I just shared this his English cover, UK cover. They changed the name of 18 Tiny Deaths to Unexplained Deaths.
Oh, okay.
And I thought that was really interesting. Yeah,
especially because in that particular, that's completely wrong, because the point of that teaching tool is there's not necessarily an explanation to those deaths. You're supposed to observe what's going on in there.
Yeah, I've actually seen if you've had a chance to see the models, they were on exhibit at the Smithsonian for a while. They're fantastic.
And we're right outside Baltimore. We were supposed to do a field trip, and then COVID happened. We can go. We have them right here.
Yeah.
So and he was willing to walk us through. So maybe soon, maybe someday. But I know they did a virtual one as well. But I do know some people who got to see it at the Smithsonian. So I've heard amazing things about it. He just did a little virtual tour. He was like, well, I'm in the office doing paperwork, so I thought I would show you some. He does that all the time, though.
Oh,
he's especially great because he's a historian too.
Yes.
So he knows the deep history
and
of what
curated them and collected them, and he was working on the refurbishment and because some of them had gotten kind of old, but they're gorgeous.
And I think in a former life he was a journalist, so he's a good writer too. That's a good book.
Yeah. We appreciated it, but it was definitely more historical. It was not. It was definitely much more history and much more about her than anything else. So I wanted to know more. We wanted to know more about what you guys do. What do medical examiners do? So it was very interesting to read your book. We definitely appreciate it a lot. My question, just since we're talking about New Zealand too, you were mentioning, what's the difference between your work there and here? It's the same kind of work, but the offices, the government, the politics, I'm assuming, are somewhat different.
It is different. Oh, look at the puppy! Sorry, I love dogs too.
It's Dabo's second birthday today. Happy birthday, Dabo!
Oh my gosh, we have a dog too. We have Winston, the Wonder Dog, who's having allergy problems right now. But
yes, I saw that with the collar.
Yeah.
So they will both eat you when you're dead.
Yes.
The dog too. I'm sorry. I know that we said that the dogs don't, but they do.
They do.
They get hungry.
Just not as quick as the cat. The cat won't even wait till
the cat goes right.
I can believe that.
But
so here in New Zealand, it's a totally different system. So they call them coroners.
Yeah.
But it's a different type of coroner.
Yeah, so it's more of the British coronial system, where the coroners are attorneys, they're lawyers, and they coordinate all the death investigation and decide whether an autopsy needs to be done. So there is a national investigation office that gets called anytime there's a sudden, unexpected, or violent death. So instead of the call coming into the medical examiner, it goes into NIO, N-I-I-O, and then they get the information from the police. They'll get information from the doctors, like medical records, and then they refer it to a coroner, and then the coroner decides I'm going to send this for an autopsy in Wellington to Dr. Melinek, or I'm going to send this for an autopsy in Auckland. So they can actually direct the body to a particular practitioner or location based on where the death occurred and where the family is. So there sometimes happens that a death will occur in the center part of New Zealand, center of the North Island, and because the family is here in Wellington, they'll bring the body here for a postmortem exam, just because I'm close to where the family
That's
is.
a big difference from the United States,
It's
where
not
everywhere in
jurisdiction
the
by
United States has a you catch it, you clean it.
Yeah, so it goes
So
by
it
the
does not
jurisdiction.
matter. Yeah, even like in a federal, like in
Yeah.
DC,
Right.
right? Where does it go if there's
It
death
goes to
in
the
DC?
DC Medical Examiner's
Right,
Office,
yeah.
so they have an ME's office just for DC.
But if somebody's on
But it's
federal
regional.
land in California, it's not like the body gets sent back to DC.
Yeah.
That's done in the county in California where
Whichever
the
the
body
county
Yeah.
is. And there are rare exceptions to that. So we will sometimes, like for example, if somebody was injured in Shasta County, which is in Northern California, and then they were airlifted to San Francisco and
which is
happened
the
to die
big
when,
hospital.
right, and then they die in San Francisco a few days later, we will call up Shasta County and ask them, would you like the body back for the autopsy to be done where your police are, so that the police can view the autopsy? And most of the time they're like, nah,
No, thank you.
no, it's okay, you can do it. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the offer, but no.
Yeah.
Rare occasions, we like Alameda and San Francisco, because they're so close to each other. If somebody, let's say, dies on the bridge, and technically they're in Alameda County, but they get brought over to San Francisco General because that's the closest hospital, and they die like as soon as they arrive in the emergency room, Alameda will take the case back. Like, but if they survive for a period of time, they're like, nah, you can do it. So
because the coroner here is the one really who is at the
That
center
goes
of the
aside.
death investigation.
Yeah.
Judy and her colleagues do determine cause of death, and you suggest what you think in your opinion
Yeah,
is the
so
manner of
sometimes
death, right?
we
But you don't
suggest an
actually
opinion,
rule
but-
on manner of death.
Yeah, we don't rule on manner. We give
Right.
suggestions, we can give direction, but things can be tough. I mean, there are times that, we don't know, and we tell the police, you need to do a little bit more investigation. I'm kind of on the fence. It could be a homicide, it could be a suicide. I'm favoring suicide, but I'm not 100% sure. Can you find out if there's any DNA on the knife? Is it his DNA or somebody else's? Like, when was he last seen alive? Who was last with him? Let's find out what's going
Another
on.
big difference here is that there are almost no gunshot
Yeah.
wound homicides.
Yeah.
There are gunshot wound suicides because New Zealand, believe it or not, has a lot of guns. They're
Very
just hunting rifles.
Yeah.
There are no handguns, basically.
There's,
Very, very strict gun laws here. No Second Amendment,
Yeah.
and so people are not armed to the hilt, and they are
They're
not
just
shooting
fewer
each other.
guns. And there's
Yeah.
less of a gun industry. I mean, to me,
Yeah.
the guns that there are primarily for rural hunting, pests, things like that.
Yeah.
We do occasionally see gunshot wound suicides and the rare gunshot wound homicide, but in general, it's not a very violent society. So I mean, in a jurisdiction of 500,000. Over the course of 1 year, I've had 6 homicides, which is very few.
But it's really, really hard to wrap your head around how underpopulated this country is. When we talk about New Zealand, we're talking about Philadelphia.
Yeah.
There are 5 million people in the whole country. Yet it
The
is
whole
a country
country.
that is bigger than Japan.
Right.
It's bigger than Britain, right?
Yeah.
It stretches from Quebec City to the Georgia, South Carolina border, basically. It's really enormous.
It's long and thin.
That said, it's not like there are no people here. There are big, Wellington is 500,000 people.
500,000 with the greater area.
Auckland is a 1.6 million person metropolis.
Yeah.
So there are cities with people, and there's just a lot of space in between with nothing.
Yeah.
How did you choose New Zealand?
COVID. So what happened is early on in the pandemic,
Right.
when I knew that there was community spread in the United States, but before we had the shutdowns, I was paying attention to the different protocols that were being implemented all over the world. And part of that was because I was in charge of the protocols for Alameda County. So I needed to know, like, is it aerosol driven? Do we need PPEs? What level of PPE do we need? How do we prevent it from spreading in the job? Like, I was immersing myself in basically the recipe book or the procedure books for Wuhan, Singapore, other counties that had encountered COVID
And then
before us.
touring. Yeah.
And so I was paying also attention to the news. And I paid attention to the fact that Jacinda Ardern, who was the Prime Minister of New Zealand, went and shut down the entire country, what she
Right.
said, to quote her, hard and early. So they shut down the borders. They implemented a managed isolation facility where if you want to come into the country, you have to go for 2 weeks in a hotel Initially, the government would pay for it. Now you have to pay for it yourself. But you're basically escorted off the plane, onto a bus, and from the bus into the hotel, and you cannot leave, and there are police around.
But also, more importantly,
And
the only
military.
people who are allowed to do this were either Kiwi
Kiwis.
citizens or people with permanent residency in New Zealand. They weren't taking outsiders anymore.
You couldn't
The
come in.
reason we got here is because Judy has an essential worker visa.
Yeah, so
There are
that's the one
never
exception.
enough forensic pathologists in New Zealand.
Well,
It's a happy reason why they don't have enough homicides for
Yeah.
people to train up here.
Right.
So
Okay.
they end up going to Australia or to the UK to train, and then they don't
Then
come
they
back
come
because the pay is better.
Yeah.
So
Oh, wow.
because they needed a forensic pathologist for this, the
And
capital
they had
city,
needed it for a
Right.
while. Like they were advertising for this job for a while,
they recruited her.
but they recruited me. And then I got the email at the time that I was starting to pull my hair out with my office. And I was afraid of bringing COVID home to TJ and to my mom, who's 75. And
Back in the
both of
Bay
us.
Area.
Back in the Bay Area. I was, and then meanwhile, the schools shut down in the Bay Area. We shut down pretty early in the
Mid-March.
United States.
Well, in
No, yeah.
San Francisco.
In San Francisco. So New Zealand went first, then San Francisco a few weeks later. And then as soon as we went into shutdown, the schools were all virtual. We have 2 daughters who are in high school. They were miserable. One of them basically locked herself in the room and wouldn't come out. The other was socializing with her friends, which she wasn't supposed to be doing because of COVID. So between the 2 of them,
Opposite
teenagers, and me being afraid of bringing them home from work and being afraid of just even going into work because the deputies were not wearing their masks. They would go out into the community and they were not wearing the mask, and I would catch them. They'd have the masks on occasionally kind of under their noses, and then they'd take them off and rub their face. And I'm like, guys, no. Or they would have meetings where all 20 deputies would be together. I'm like, you can't be social distancing at home and then come into work and then 20 of you are together and then you're rotating through the jail where you have access to everybody who's coming into the jail. That's bullshit.
But of course, this was a worldwide problem, the
Yeah.
gap between what the scientists knew
Right.
and what the people running society are willing to hear. But here in New Zealand,
Yeah.
there was
There
no
was
gap.
no gap.
Like
They were listening.
Prime Minister Ardern listened to the top scientists and did something that at the time was really risky
And that
and
radical-
everybody thought would fail.
Yeah.
Everyone thought it's not going to work. You're still going to get
And it was
COVID and
brilliant.
you're going to completely destroy the economy.
And
That
it was
has not been
brilliant.
the case.
So what happened was that they shut down for 6 or 7 weeks at level
Very
4.
serious shutdown. Like
level
you can't
4.
leave the house
You couldn't-
except to walk your
everybody-
dog.
Yeah. So you could walk your dog. You could stay within 500 meters of your house, but that's it. And there was no socializing between bubbles. They explained what a bubble was to the population. They said you stay within your bubble of your family, but you cannot socialize with your neighbors. You cannot go see other people. The only people who are allowed to go to work, to leave the house, people can work from home, but if you need to leave the house to work, it has to be because you work for food services, so that's an essential job, or healthcare. That's it. And police. Okay. And that was it. So that's how they did it. Yeah.
I had a question about doing autopsies on COVID patients, especially early on with everything.
Yeah.
Because you were talking about doing the hazmat suits
Right.
during the anthrax when you did
Yeah.
that
Right.
autopsy.
Very good.
So especially with US, New Zealand, how did you guys handle that when we didn't have as much information as we have
Right.
now without the
So-
COVID?
I was actually in Alameda County at the time that we had community spread, and we had a few suspected cases, one of which came from China and died suddenly and had respiratory problems. And I called the CDC, and we put on the hazmat suit, the PAPRs, they're called, the positive airway pressure respirators. So you get kind of a hood and the whole thing. And we did the autopsy, and it turns out that he didn't have COVID, that first case. That was in January of 2020. So January 26th is when I did that autopsy. Turned out he was negative. But then there were other cases that came in, but they came in from the hospital. So the people had respiratory problems, and either we knew they already had COVID, in which case we didn't do an autopsy, or they were suspected, in which case they had symptoms that suggested it, and we would swab them and leave them in the trailer. And if the swab came back positive, we didn't do an autopsy. If the swab came back negative, then we do the autopsy. So we created a screening program.
And if the swab came back positive, you don't need to do an autopsy
Yeah,
because
you
you
know why
just
they
determined the
died.
cause of death.
Yeah, we figured it out. So I was trying
As long
to
as there's no
see-
gunshot
yeah,
wound or
exactly.
something, right?
So then with time, I started to say, well, what's going to happen once there's community spread and everybody's positive, or people are positive but they die from gunshot wounds? We're still going to need to do an autopsy.
Right.
So we put together the protocols to do that, in a secure room with just 2 people, with all of the gear, and eventually we figured out that COVID is not that infectious in the dead state. it's people
different
are
different
much more,
pathogens have
Yeah.
different infectivity in the postmortem state.
Yeah.
And
so
COVID was
living
pretty
versus
low.
death.
Yeah.
So like, for example, Ebola. Ebola is a really, really hardy virus, and it actually continues to replicate in the body after death. So the dead body is actually more infectious. Getting into contact with like the blood or fluids from a dead body is a very high risk compared to a living person. Dead bodies are even more infections than living people for Ebola. You don't do an autopsy on Ebola. You wrap it up and you go straight to cremation.
And HIV is the opposite.
HIV is
right?
the opposite. Doesn't
Yeah.
stick around very long.
Yeah.
Hepatitis C can stick around, and SARS or any of the respiratory pathogens, they are the most dangerous when a living person is breathing on you or coughing.
So
or,
this is why
yeah.
the people who are really in danger are people
Are
working
the
in the hospitals, intubating,
Right, intubating.
or doing respiratory therapy on
Right.
people who are living and trying to stay alive.
So that highest risk are going to be healthcare workers dealing with the sick. But then second is going to be my investigators who are coming out to the scene and talking to the family members. So the dead body might have COVID, but he's already dead, but the family members might be infectious or asymptomatic, and they don't even know it, and they're talking to each other, and they're indoors sharing the air. So I was trying to get my investigators, you got to wear a mask before you go within a certain distance of anybody in the house. And if you cross a threshold, if you're going into someone's house, I want you fully covered up. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. Okay. So that's why I was afraid. Yeah. So I mean, we're going to hopefully write about that in our upcoming fiction series. We'd like to be able to cover that.
We've just pitched the third book in the Jesse Teska series
Wanted to get
to
picked up.
our agent. Our agent has a few very insightful notes for us, so we're going to rework the pitch,
Yeah.
and then she's going to take it to our publisher, and we're going to see if
Yeah.
they want to publish it or
Publish it.
not,
Yeah.
which we don't know because
Yeah,
they are the
so-
ones who know the sales numbers. You know, from working in the bookstore industry, that like this is all kept under wraps.
Right.
They have all the sales numbers. We don't know what they are, and they will make their decision on whether they're going to publish another book or not based on how the last one.
How well
It's just
it
like
does.
Hollywood.
Yeah.
You're only as good as your last project.
Yeah. So if you like the books, please tell everyone.
Yeah.
We will. We will. And
Yeah.
definitely now we'll read the I was going to ask if you were going to write any more nonfiction or if you'd considered that. You've got this streak of
consider
fiction,
it,
Yeah.
so
So I have.
Judy always has ideas.
I'm always ideas. I'm the idea person. I'm the CEO, and he works for me.
you're such a great team. I love it.
We do. We work really well together, and it's funny. You know, TJ is the one who says we have no overlapping skill set, because I'm the one who comes up with the ideas, but I'm like overflowing with ideas, but I don't have the follow through.
And I'm one of those writers who I love being locked in a room wrestling with adjectives all day. I just love it. If you give me the story, then I will write it. And
Yeah.
so Judy gives me the story, and I write
Right, and then if he gets stuck, he comes to me, and I throw ideas at him
Right.
until he goes, "Okay, stop
it.
talking
Yeah.
now."
So I never have the fear of a blank page, like especially when you're writing a detective novel. You know you're here, and you've got to get here. What happens in between?
Right.
So we just go for a walk. She tells me what happens in between.
Yeah.
And I do it.
And then we
It's great.
dictate it, like we dictate it into the phone,
But
like
for-
memo.
For nonfiction
so
books,
awesome.
Judy had an idea for
I have an idea.
When Trees Kill.
Yeah,
Was one,
Trees
right?
Kill.
Yeah.
So I went once to this conference where there were a whole bunch of expert witness conference. And I thought it would be kind of boring, but it turned out to be the most fascinating conference I've ever gone to, because as you know, like if you go to a book sellers conference, everybody's a bookseller, right? If you go to a medical conference, everybody's in medicine. Well, if you go to an expert witness conference, everybody is from all over the type of expertise. So I just kind of went around the room. I felt like I was in a candy store. Like, what do you do? And they're like, I'm a dentist. Like, what do you testify in? Well, I do dental identification in forensic cases, or when dentistry, sometimes dentists kill people. I'm like, oh, okay. And go to the next
You
person.
keep it right next to your brain,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
What do you do? She goes, I'm a flight attendant. Why are you here? Well, when we tell
Wow.
people to watch out because the bags may have shifted during landing, that's why I'm here.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
Who are
What
you?
else is-
I'm an elevator engineer. I don't even want
Yeah, I know.
to. I'm not even gonna-
I had so much fun at this conference. I thought, wouldn't it be great to write a book that was basically like the conference with each chapter being
Because
about a
one
different expert?
of them was a
was
botanist.
not arborist. An arborist. What do you do?
Forensic
I'm a forensic arborist. I'm like, what is that? He said, I cut down trees. And I'm like, why are you here? He goes, sometimes trees kill
Trees
people.
are dangerous.
Yes.
Gravity will
Yes.
kill you.
We will read that. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I thought that
So
was
we had that
fascinating.
idea. We're not. That's
We
it's
haven't
not in
worked
the
out
works.
that. That's real
But
good.
if we are not fortunate enough to be able to continue writing novels, then we might switch to
That we'll do
nonfiction.
that. We'll do nonfiction again. But yeah, I mean, we just enjoy working together.
We do, yeah.
You know, because
That's
I'm
good.
still, my primary source of income is my consulting and my medical, doing autopsies.
My friend Laura also, she's watching on Facebook, and she
Okay.
is not part of the book club. I mean, she's welcome, but she just said, "I'm intrigued. I will need to read these books now. This is why I love these interviews with authors."
Yeah.
She watches
Thank you so much.
everything I put on Facebook. She's so great.
It's so sweet.
She said, "What an interesting perspective about the pandemic from a medical examiner." Laura, you will have to read Working Stiff because I'm going to give you a copy. I promise. I will bring you a copy the next time you're around.
Awesome.
I think she'll appreciate it. So, Jackie,
Well,
did you have anything you wanted to add before? I wanted to wrap it up because I know you're on your lunch break. I feel bad. We
I
took
gotta,
your
I gotta
lunch
go
hour
eat
to
something.
eat.
I'm absolutely famished.
So,
So I thought a fun little tip you might like is when I was in high school, for how much I enjoy anatomy and stuff like that, I was failing biology, and my brother needed an appendectomy, and my teacher gave me a B if I could try to get him the appendix to show up in class.
Did you get it?
I got a C for effort. I worked real hard for that.
Best friends, one of my best friends when I was growing up in elementary school, her mom was a doctor, and she had had a cholecystectomy, had her gallbladder removed. And I remember that she had the gallstones, in a little jar kind of by the bedside table. And I was like, that is the coolest thing.
They won't give out anything anymore.
Fascinating. Yeah.
right.
He's biohazard.
Stephanie, did you have any other questions?
No, I've just enjoyed listening to the conversation. I did listen to the book and everything. It's been a minute since I did it, so I really appreciate being able to interact and actually talk medical and hear medical from you guys. And
Thank you so much. No, this has been our pleasure. It's
Well,
really
we
fun.
have a 6-minute reading from Aftershock. If you'd like to hear that, if you want to. Take
If
the
you
to
have
do that.
time, I don't.
Yeah,
it's up to
we do.
you.
Yeah, you wanna do that?
Okay,
Okay,
that's fine.
go
Let me
ahead.
just check in with my registrar and make sure. I don't know if she's out of the.
Stacy, did you have any other questions? Sorry, I know you're on mute.
No, that's
Just
fine.
kidding.
No, the only thing I did want to make sure to get to say to you, Judy, is I really did appreciate the perspective from for the whole 9/11 event and dealing with all that. Again, that was such a big day for everyone, and again, you kind of don't think of everyone involved in it and all the steps of all that. And
There was a
it hit
colossal
me.
effort.
Oh,
Yeah,
I was
thank you
crying
so
so
much.
much.
It
Yeah.
was the hardest part for us to write.
Yeah.
I mean, emotionally, that was a really tough part for us to write, but we felt how important it was.
Well, we especially
Yeah.
felt it was important for now our 21-year-old son, his generation,
Yeah.
and other generations that
it's
come
history.
afterwards, because the actual real history of what happened almost immediately gets buried. Not buried intentionally, but like nobody really remembers. In fact, people sometimes just shut away what happened to them if they don't write it down right away. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
Well, even my little brother, he was in kindergarten when all that happened, and it broke my heart more because he came home and I came home from school, and he said, "Stacy, we got out of school today because there was a big fire in New York." And I'm like, "Oh," I'm like, "How?" Like I'm just all of it, and like I said, it was just amazing to read your experience with all that. And the part that killed me was the little kid sending you the snack things. I was like, that was amazing. I was crying, telling my coworker about it. It was so sweet.
Yeah, no, it's really moving.
Yeah.
So we'll read to you here from
Okay.
Aftershock. We should give you a trigger warning that we're going to be discussing a body that's been disfigured, and it will compared to Working Stiff, it might actually remind you of the opening chapter of Working Stiff.
Yeah, this is actually a good example of how we take Judy's actual experience and fictionalize it. Because if you remember, the opening of Working Stiff is somebody who dies in a construction accident. And you'll see in a minute how this is
how this plays in. And so this is again loosely based on actual cases that I've done, where I've fictionalized them and changed them in terms of location and detail. But this ties in a bit to that case in Working Stiff.
And also, we really only take the mechanics
Right.
of the death.
Yeah.
And then we build a mystery into that, and we get to play God and for once
Right.
decide
We know
what
the
actually
answer.
happens, right?
Yeah, so
We know the
unlike
answer.
the real forensic cases where I don't find out what happens, here we
Right.
know what happens.
So this is from our second novel, Aftershock. The first novel is called First Cut, but you can read them in either order. Aftershock is a sequel, but it works fine as a standalone also. So there's a dead man in a business suit at a San Francisco construction site called Soma Center. His body is pinned under a pile of pipes. Dr. Jessie Teska has arrived at the scene investigation along with her medical examiner investigator colleagues, Cameron and Donna, as well as homicide detective Keith Jones. Jones has asked the construction foreman named Samuel Urias to use the heavy machinery at the site to lift the pipes off the corpse.
It was getting near 8:30 by the time Urias finally swung the arm of the heavy machine up in the air, opened the grabber, and lowered it slowly onto our death scene.
The grabber's tines closed around the pipes and they clattered. The truck roared. It heaved the pipes, pivoted them well away from the body, and dropped them in the dust beyond the flatbed trailer. Jones lifted the police tape to approach the body, then jumped clear out of his shoes at a deafening blast from the front loader's air horn. Up in the cab, Urias was wagging his finger wildly. He swung the grabber arm away from the side of the machine, lowered it to the ground, and killed the engine.
Okay, Urias hollered. Clear!
It's not easy to rile a big city police detective, but at that moment, Homicide Inspector Keith Jones looked like he had developed a burning desire to clean Samuel Urias's clock for him.
We followed Jones under the tape to get a clear look at the body. The head, neck, and upper rib cage had been obliterated. I've never seen a worse case of disfigurement except maybe in one or two bodies that had been left to decompose in the open, where animals had gotten to them. A case from the year before involving a coyote in the woods near Lincoln Park golf course came vividly to mind. This pulpy slough leaking into a business suit was even less recognizable as a human body. Brain matter was smeared into the dirt, and hairy chunks of skull had been scattered like pottery shards. The crushed area was pink in places, red in places, but mostly just kind of tan colored. Donna was seeing what I was seeing and shaking her head.
That ain't right.
Well, I replied, it's interesting.
What about it? Said Inspector Jones.
I'm concerned what we're not seeing is a giant puddle of blood here. I would expect much more bleeding from such a violent crush injury. Practically all the man's pressurized blood should have gushed out of those ruptured neck vessels.
So where is it?
I can't tell you that until I perform the full autopsy, but just on first impression, this looks like post-mortem injury to me. I didn't have to explain to the homicide detective what that meant.
You think this is a homicide staged to look like an accident?
I think the visible evidence indicates that this man was already dead when those pipes came down on him. Let's see what else we can determine right now.
Uh-huh, said Jones with 0% conviction.
The beat cops tried to keep the construction workers from crowding the tape cordon, but it was no use. We had an audience. The crew from CSI moved back in to take more pictures, then gave us the go-ahead to handle the body. Identification is our first and top priority. We went straight for the dead man's pockets and found a wallet. It had a California driver's license under the name of Leopold Herring, address in San Francisco on Castaneda Avenue.
Forest Hill, Cam said. Money.
Jones peered at the picture on the driver's license, then at the pulp piled on the end of the man's shoulders and grunted. I manipulated an arm. The body was in full rigor mortis. That meant, I told Jones, he had been dead at least 6 hours. 3 a.m., maybe 2 a.m. at the earliest for a ballpark time of death. But I reminded him, that's the outside window. It could be a lot earlier.
Can't you narrow that down?
Let's do a body temperature, I said to Cam. We put the wallet back in Leopold Herring's pocket where we found it, and Cameron yanked down the trousers. It required some effort, thanks to the rigor mortis. He inserted a thermometer into the cadaver's rectum and told Donna it came to 80 Fahrenheit. She wrote that down, consulted an outdoor thermometer she kept at her death scene kit, and told me the ambient temperature was 54. I looked at the time and did the math. He probably died between 6 and 10 last night.
That's the best you can tell?
Yes, and I might be wrong.
You guys always say that.
We mean it. Time of death estimation is unreliable. It depends on too many variables.
Okay, the detective said.
I recalled from working with him before that he said okay a lot, but usually didn't mean it.
Detective, someone yelled from behind the cordon line. It was the superintendent, cell phone still on his ear. Do we know who it is?
Jones wasn't about to shout the dead man's name into the crowd, so he gestured the superintendent over. I watched Jones read the name off his notebook. The superintendent's jaw fell open. He bobbled the cell phone, dropped it in the dirt, and scrambled to pick it up. He stared at the shattered corpse in disbelief. Then he dusted off the phone and walked away, dialing frantically.
Hey, the detective called out, irked. You know this guy? Google it, the superintendent said, and disappeared into the crowd of hard hats. Goddamn people, said Jones, and stalked after him.
Donna already had her smartphone in hand and was typing. Cam and I huddled with her.
Leopold Andreas Herring, 52, was one of the most famous and acclaimed architects in the world, known for boldness of vision coupled with a towering intellect, said the one article.
Herring's work unites a classical rigor of form with a disciplined attention to and intention of function as the sine qua non of a building, Donis read. His use of materials has proven famously visionary, yet has always been coupled with a miraculous lack of pretension.
Enough, said Cam.
Wait, you got to hear this one. He's our great cityscape cubist, the Picasso of the building arts.
Donna, said Cam. Our shift ended half an hour ago. Can we get the pouch and gurney, please, before we end up on the news? I don't like being on the news.
Fine, fine. She produced a white sheet which she draped carefully over the acclaimed architect's mortal remains, and the two of them trekked back to the van. I scanned the crowd of hard hats for Jones, but didn't see him. My cell phone rang. It was the boss, Chief Medical Examiner Dr. James Howe.
Jesse? He sounded faint and far away.
Dr. Howe, I hollered and stuck a finger in my left ear. The morning shift had been standing around with nothing to do for more than 3 hours and had apparently decided to fire up every heavy vehicle on the lot in preparation for the moment we allowed them to start work. I started walking and talking, searching for a quiet spot.
What the hell is going on up there? Dr. Howe said. I've got everyone from the highway patrol to the mayor on my ass about your death scene. They're saying you've locked it all down?
Yeah, it's not looking like an accident over here.
What do you mean? It's a construction site with a fatal crush injury, right?
Not exactly. The injuries all look post-mortem. It turned into a suspicious death pretty quick, so I had to call in CSI. I finally found a sheltered spot, a section of unfussy concrete foundation behind a chain-link gate. It was below grade and dark, but good and quiet. We just got access to the body a minute ago, I told Dr. Howe. We also just got a presumptive ID, but that's another complication.
Why?
Now it's suspicious and high profile. The driver's license in his pocket belongs to a Leopold Herring. Apparently he's a famous...
Oh, sweet Jesus.
You've heard of him.
Get that body into the truck and out of there before the press shows up, Dr. Teska. What happened to him?
I described the circumstances as we had found them and what we had gone through to extricate the body. Dr. Howe didn't like the story, especially once he reckoned, excuse me, how many scene spectators there were among the hard hats and how many of them might have been sneaking cell phone pictures. I issued the assuring assurances I'd perfected in my short career under short-tempered boss men. I was good at it, and it worked. Dr. Howe let me go. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you read either or both of our detective novels, we'll be happy to join back up with
I
you.
was say, bless you.
We really love talking to book reading
clubs.
Groups after they've read the detective
Yeah,
novels
because
because
then
we can unleash all the spoilers.
See, we can't tell you who did it, but we can if you read it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really
you.
appreciate your time, and I want to make sure you get some lunch because that's important.
Yeah. Thank you.
My husband
And
never eats.
please tag us on Facebook and Twitter and give me the link so that I can share it so other people can see it as well.
Sure, totally. So yeah, because this is on YouTube and Facebook. So I'm hang on, we got one more YouTube comment or one more comment. Oh, Laura just said thank you so much for another great interview too. So we
Thank
really
you so
appreciated your time, and we will definitely include your new books in next year's list. So it'll be sometime in the next
appreciate it.
year. We'll
Thank
add both
you.
of them because we love
Yeah,
repeat.
and if for capriccios,
However you
Right,
remember
right.
the bookstore.
however you remember it.
Yeah.
If you want signed book plates, the two of us can sign stickers or book plates, and we can send them to you as well. So just let us know, and we could do that.
I have your email now. Thanks to Jackie. Thank you again so much, Jackie, for connecting us. I'll have to be better at
Thank you,
Twitter.
Jackie.
I am not a big Twitter person. It just goes too fast for me, and it's a little overwhelming. I'm Instagram. I like the visual.
Yeah.
Oh, and
Yeah, but see, I don't like Instagram because I can't share photos. I mean, like unless it's histology photos.
Yes. And then there was I was gonna mention something about TikTok earlier. There was some TikTok reference that I was gonna tell you about, but now I don't remember. If I remember, I'll email you. Yeah, exactly. There's some TikTok that was fascinating that I have to send you. But either way, I love all that. But I will make sure I get on Twitter more often and follow you both. And I hope your puppy feels better because I know your puppy's not well. So yes, exactly. I sent a message. I said we use pool noodles around our dog. It didn't work very well, but
so I use
I like your
I got these
loofahs.
kind of plastic Brillo pads, and I put them on a necklace. And
Do they work?
Kind of nice. They're not irritating. They're kind of soft actually when you touch them. But they work just as well.
Well, thank you again so much, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And we will wrap it up. Thank you.
Rest of your Wednesday.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Good to meet you.